She's the family project that never got finished. Ryan laughed and picked up his wine glass like he'd just said the cleverest thing in the room. Amber's mother pressed her lips together in a polite smile. Her father didn't smile at all. My name is Sophie Wells. I'm 31. I'm the younger sister. The quiet one. The one who, according to my family, was always one step behind everyone else and somehow never managed to catch up. We were at Bellacourt, a private dining room my brother had reserved for his engagement dinner. 12 people around a long table with linen napkins and candles. Ryan's friends. Amber's parents. Our mother. Me. The kind of setting where everyone performs a version of themselves they've been rehearsing for years. Ryan had been performing all night. He was good at it. He always had been. I noticed Amber's father about 20 minutes into the first course. He was a tall man in a dark blazer, silver at his temples, the kind of calm that doesn't come from contentment, but from years of knowing exactly where you stand in every room you walk into. He'd been introduced to me as Gerald Caldwell. He shook my hand, held it for a half-second longer than necessary, and looked at me like he was trying to play something. I gave him a small smile and moved on. I already knew who he was. Ryan didn't notice any of that. Ryan was doing what Ryan always does at gatherings, which is expand to fill every available inch of silence. He'd started with his recent promotion, then his bonus, then the story about the Hamptons house he was putting an offer on. Amber laughed in the right places. Her mother asked enthusiastic questions. Our mother beamed from across the table like she was watching a performance she'd directed herself. I ate my salad and listened. Then someone, I think it was one of Ryan's friends from college, asked what I did, and Ryan answered before I could open my mouth. Sophie's still working on that, he said lightly, swirling his glass. She's always been more of a thinker than a doer, right, Soph? A few people chuckled. Amber touched his arm like it was a joke between them. Our mother tilted her head with the particular expression she reserved for moments like this, fond and forgiving. The kind of look that says boys will be boys, and also that's just how things are. I said nothing. I took a sip of water. Ryan, emboldened by the lack of resistance, kept going. She's the family project that never got finished. Another laugh. We love her anyway. That was the moment I saw Gerald Caldwell set down his fork. Not dramatically, just quietly, deliberately, the way a man does when he's decided something. He was watching me, not with pity, with something closer to recognition and maybe a flicker of discomfort, the kind that comes when you realize the person being discussed in front of you is not who the speaker thinks they are. I met his eyes for a moment. Then I looked back at my plate. Ryan lifted his glass toward Amber's parents. Anyway, enough about family baggage. To the happy couple, Gerald Caldwell did not lift his glass right away. Let me tell you something about how silence accumulates. People assume it's passive. They think the quiet one at the table has nothing to say, or is too nervous to say it, or simply hasn't figured out yet what's worth saying. What they don't understand is that silence is a choice, and it has a different weight depending on who's making it. I'd been making that choice for almost a decade. Growing up, Ryan was the kind of kid adults described with adjectives like promising and driven and sharp. Teachers called our mother to tell her how well he was doing. He had presence. He took up space in every room and people responded to it the way people respond to confidence, which is to say they rewarded it, often without asking whether it was earned. I was quieter, more careful, better at reading a room than performing in it. My mother used to say I was still finding myself, which sounds supportive until you realize it's what she said every single time someone asked about me, for years, long after I'd already found myself and built something real. The thing about signing a non-disclosure agreement when you're 24 and co-founding a company with serious backing is that you get very used to not talking about it. The company was called Vantage. We built infrastructure software for financial institutions, the kind of systems that handle data verification, security architecture, and fraud detection across thousands of transactions per second. By the time I was 28, Vantage had contracts with 14 of the top 50 financial firms in the country. By the time I was 30, we'd been acquired, and I'd stayed on as Chief Strategy Officer with equity that hadn't fully vested yet and a title that meant nothing to anyone at my family's dinner table. Ryan worked at one of those 14 firms. He didn't know that. He'd never asked what I did in enough detail to find out. He knew I worked in tech. The way people know their neighbor has a dog, present awareness with zero further curiosity. My mother knew I'd done well. She knew in the abstract the way you know a country you've never visited exists. She'd stopped asking detailed questions around the time I stopped giving ones she could brag about at book club, because what I did wasn't the kind of thing that translated easily into a sentence that sounded impressive at parties. It wasn't a title she could announce. It wasn't a salary figure she understood. It was complicated and quiet and built over years of work that didn't photograph well. So she'd let Ryan's version of me become the default. Easier, less work. And Ryan, who had never once asked what I was actually doing, had constructed an entire story out of my silence. The family project that never got finished. I'd heard versions of that my whole life. Evelyn's still figuring things out. Sophie's more of a floater. She'll land somewhere eventually. And the worst part wasn't that they said it. It was that they said it in front of people, casually, like the information was theirs to share, like my life was a minor subplot in the story of Ryan's success. That night at Bellacourt, I watched my mother nod along with a warmth that had nothing to do with me, and I understood something I'd been circling for years. She wasn't cruel. She was just incurious. There's a version of neglect that doesn't look like neglect at all. It looks like a parent who loves you and just never thought to look closer. That understanding didn't stop it from hurting, but it stopped surprising me. After the entree was cleared, Ryan stood up to give a small toast. He talked about Amber, about finding someone who matched his energy, about building a life that reflected your values. He was good at this, genuinely good, warm and specific in a way that made people lean in. Even I felt it a little. Then he looped back to family, the way people do when they want to seem grounded. He talked about our mother. He said a few generous things about our father, who'd passed 6 years ago. He mentioned growing up and learning what it meant to work hard. He didn't mention me. I noticed it the way you notice an empty chair at a table that should be full, not dramatic. Just a fact. Amber's mother made a small sound of approval. Ryan sat down. The table applauded. Gerald Caldwell had been watching me the entire time Ryan spoke. When the applause faded, he leaned slightly forward and said, quietly but clearly enough that the people nearest to him could hear, Ryan, before we move on, I'd like to ask something. The table shifted. Ryan smiled with the confidence of a man who expected the next sentence to be a compliment. Of course, he said. Gerald set his napkin on the table. He didn't look at Ryan when he spoke. He looked at me. You introduced Sophie earlier as the family project that never got finished. He said it without inflection, just the words themselves, placed carefully on the table like evidence. I want to make sure I'm understanding the family correctly. Ryan laughed, uncertain now. It's just a joke. We have a bit of a Sophie Wells, Gerald said. And his voice was not loud, but it was the kind of voice that fills a room without effort. Co-founder of Vantage Systems. The table went still. Ryan's smile held for exactly 2 more seconds before it started to change. The infrastructure Vantage built, Gerald continued, looking at Ryan now, runs across your firm's entire fraud detection system. Has for 4 years. I know this because Caldwell Partners was an early investor. I sat across from Sophie at a board meeting in March of last year. Someone set a glass down too hard. I didn't look to see who. My mother turned to me slowly, like she was afraid the movement might break something. Ryan's face was doing something complicated. The confidence hadn't left entirely, but it was shifting, rearranging itself around a new set of facts it hadn't been built to accommodate. That's he started. Then stopped. Gerald Caldwell looked at him steadily. I've watched Sophie present to a room of 12 partners and hold her ground on every question for 2 hours. She was, without exaggeration, one of the most prepared people I have ever seen in that context. He picked up his wine glass now, unhurried. I wanted to make sure the family knew that. He drank. The rest of the table did not. I stood up. I hadn't planned the speech. I'd planned the other thing. The actual thing, the thing that had been in motion for 3 weeks before this dinner. But standing up, speaking, that part I hadn't scripted. I didn't correct anyone, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. Not tonight, not before tonight. I signed agreements that made it easier to stay quiet, and I kept staying quiet after the agreements expired because I'd gotten used to it. I looked at my brother, and because it felt like the kindest option. Ryan's jaw was tight. Amber had her hand on his arm, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me. But I want to say something clearly, I continued. Not for the room. Just so it's been said out loud at least once. I turned to my mother. I built something real. It took years, and I worked harder than anyone in this family has ever seen me work, because none of you were watching. That's not blame. It's just accurate. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. Ryan found his voice. Sophie, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. You didn't ask. I sat back down. For a moment, no one spoke. Gerald Caldwell gave me a single nod, the kind that acknowledges something without making a performance of it. Amber's mother reached across and touched my hand briefly. Then the conversation moved, haltingly, in a different direction. And the dinner continued, though it felt like a different dinner than the one we'd started. Under the table, my phone buzzed twice. I didn't check it until I excused myself after dessert. The first message was from our legal team. The restructure review I'd initiated 3 weeks ago had reached the next stage. Ryan's firm had been flagged as part of a broader audit Vantage had requested when the acquisition terms were renegotiated. The flagging wasn't punitive. It was procedural. But procedural flags at that firm had a way of becoming very visible very quickly, especially for people in client-facing leadership roles who'd built their reputation on seamlessness. The second message was from a colleague. Just 2 words. It's done. I stood in the hallway outside the private dining room and looked at my phone for a long moment. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. What I'd set in motion wasn't revenge. I hadn't initiated the audit because of anything Ryan had said or done to me personally. I'd initiated it because I'd found a real discrepancy in how our software contract had been managed at that firm, a discrepancy that had been quietly disadvantaging Vantage for 14 months. And I decided to stop letting it slide. Professionally, it was the right call. The timing, arriving the same week as this dinner, was not an accident. But the reason was legitimate. Ryan didn't know any of this. He would soon enough. I put my phone in my pocket and went back to the table. The rest of the evening was quiet. Ryan was performing a different version of himself now, more careful, smaller somehow. He laughed at things, but not as loud. He didn't make any more jokes. Our mother kept glancing at me like she was trying to reconcile 2 photographs that didn't match. When we said goodnight in the parking lot, Gerald Caldwell shook my hand again. I should have spoken up sooner tonight, he said quietly. You spoke up at the right moment, I told him. He nodded. I hope things are easier now. I thought about it honestly. I think they'll be different. I'm not sure that's the same as easier. He smiled for the first time all evening. No, I suppose it isn't. Ryan caught me before I reached my car. He came across the parking lot quickly, and when he stopped in front of me, something had broken open in his face. Not the confidence. That was still there underneath. But the ease had gone. You could have told me, he said. At any point. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him. The streetlight made everything flat and honest. Why didn't you ask? He had no answer to that. I'd known he wouldn't. Ryan. I kept my voice even. Not cold. Just clear. Every time you called me the one still figuring it out. I could have corrected you. I didn't. Because I thought it was easier. Turns out it was just quieter. Those aren't the same thing either. He rubbed the back of his neck. The audit is procedural. It'll go where it goes. I looked at him. But if I were you, I'd make sure everything on your end is in order. Not because of me. Because it's the smart thing to do. He searched my face for something. Anger, maybe. Something he could push back against. I wasn't angry. I'd moved past it some time ago without noticing the exact moment. What I felt was more like clarity, the particular quiet that comes when you stop waiting for permission to take up space. Get some sleep, I said. It was a nice engagement dinner. I got in my car and drove home. 3 days later, Ryan called me. He didn't lead with an apology. That would have required more self-awareness than he'd had time to develop in 72 hours. But he asked questions. Real ones. How long had I been at Vantage? What the acquisition meant for my role? What I was working on now? He listened to the answers without interrupting, which was new. At the end of the call, he said, "I didn't realize. I know. I'm sorry for the things I said. The project that never got finished thing. That was," he stopped. "Tried again. That wasn't fair." It wasn't an eloquent apology, but it was honest, and honest is rarer than eloquent, so I accepted it. My mother called the following Sunday. She asked how I was, which she always does, and then she was quiet for a while before she said, "Why didn't you ever tell me what you'd built?" I sat with that question for a moment before answering. "I tried, a few times, early on. You'd say things like 'that sounds complicated,' or 'I'm sure you'll find your footing,' and I understood that you were trying to be kind. So, eventually, I stopped trying to explain it in a way you'd understand, and just kept doing it." She made a small sound, something between acknowledgement and pain. "I should have asked more." "Yes," I said. "You should have. We weren't going to fix 20 years in a Sunday phone call." I didn't expect that, and I don't think she did either. But there was something different in her voice after that night at Bellacourt. Less certainty, maybe. The kind of space that opens up when someone's fixed idea of you gets disturbed and hasn't settled into a new shape yet. The audit at Ryan's firm wrapped up 6 weeks later. His role was reviewed as part of the broader process. He wasn't fired, but he was moved, laterally, away from the client relationships he'd spent 5 years building. The firm cited restructuring. Internally, everyone knew what it meant. He called me the night it happened, and this time the call was different. Shorter. He didn't ask for sympathy, which surprised me. He just said, "I guess I had it coming in some ways." I didn't agree or disagree. I said, "It's a setback. You'll figure it out." I meant it. I know Ryan's capable. I've always known that. Capability was never his problem. At Amber's family's 4th of July gathering the following summer, Ryan and I arrived separately and stood on the same side of the lawn. Not avoiding each other, but not quite sure yet how to be around each other in the new version of ourselves. Amber walked between us at one point and squeezed both our arms, like she was stitching something together. And maybe she was. Gerald Caldwell was there, because of course he was. He found me by the water, and we talked for a while about nothing important, the way people do when they're comfortable. At one point, he gestured toward Ryan, who was laughing at something with Amber's cousins, easier in his body than he'd been in months. "He seems like he's adjusting," Gerald said. "He's resilient," I said. "He always has been." "And you?" I thought about it. The question felt larger than it sounded. I stopped making myself smaller, so other people would feel more comfortable. That's newer than it should be. But it's good. He nodded. "It usually is." My mother was standing near the table with the potato salad, watching me talk to Gerald Caldwell with an expression I'd never seen on her before. It took me a moment to identify it. It was pride, but uncertain. Like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right to it yet. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe that was okay too. I walked over to her. We stood beside each other for a minute, looking out at the water. "You look good," she said finally. "I feel good," I said. She reached over and took my hand and held it briefly, the way she used to when I was small and the world felt too large. I let her. "I'm still learning you," she said. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. "You have time," I told her. Somewhere behind us. Ryan laughed at something too loud and then caught himself and laughed again. Quieter this time. Like a man practicing a new register. Like someone who'd started to understand that presence doesn't have to be performance. I stood in the sunshine with my mother's hand in mine and thought about all the years I'd made myself invisible to keep the peace, and all the years I'd spent building something real in that invisibility, and how the two things had finally collapsed into each other in a private dining room over someone else's engagement dinner. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel after a long trip when you finally get home and drop your bags in the doorway and just stand there for a second before deciding what to do next. I thought about what Gerald had said that night, sitting across from me at the board meeting in March, before any of this. He'd said, quietly, between agenda items, "You don't fight for credit the way other people do. You should be careful that doesn't become a habit that costs you." I hadn't answered him then. I'd filed it away. Now, I thought the answer was something like this. I'm not interested in credit for its own sake. I'm interested in being seen accurately. I'm interested in the people who claim to know me actually knowing me. Those aren't the same thing as credit, but they require the same thing, which is that you stop letting other people narrate your life simply because they're louder than you are. Ryan eventually rebuilt. It took longer than he would have liked. The adjustment was good for him in ways he couldn't see while it was happening. He became better at listening, less reflexive with the joke. He still has presence. He'll probably always have that. But it's less of a performance now, and the difference matters. My mother started asking questions. Specific ones. She still didn't always understand the answers, but she asked. And she listened, and she didn't fill the silence with easy reassurances anymore. That change was small, and it was real. I stayed at Vantage through the rest of my vesting schedule. Then I left, quietly, the way I do most things, and started building the next one. I didn't announce it on LinkedIn. I didn't send a press release. I told the people who needed to know, signed the agreements, and went to work. Somewhere in the country, in a firm I will not name. Someone will eventually realize they're using my infrastructure again without knowing my name. I'm at peace with that. More than I used to be. Because I've learned the difference between being unknown and being unseen. One is a circumstance. The other is something you allow. I don't allow it anymore.